My name is Elaine Howard. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I was the calm in the storm, head nurse at the town hospital, the one people called in their worst moments. I'd seen every kind of pain, but nothing quite prepared me for the silence that filled my house after my husband Robert passed away 6 months ago. We'd lived in that house for over 4 decades. The garden he built, the dented kitchen counter where Brent, our only son, chipped the laminate with a toy car, the swing on the porch where Robert proposed to me on a rainy Tuesday. Everything in that home whispered of the life we built together. And suddenly, all of it just stopped talking. The grief was loud at first, heavy, screaming through every photo on the wall, but then it settled into a quiet that hurt more. Days blurred into one another. I stopped watching the news, stopped going to church. I barely left the house. That's when Brent and Melissa came by. Melissa hugged me tightly, kissed my cheek. "You shouldn't be alone in a house full of ghosts," she said, her voice soft, eyes glossy. Brent added, "Come stay with us, Mom, just until you feel strong again." It sounded kind, comforting even. I wanted to believe them. I told myself that maybe this was what family did, closed ranks when the world cracked open. So I packed a few bags and moved into their guest room. Their home was modern, beige, soulless, in a way mine never had been, but I adjusted. I cooked dinner every evening, meatloaf on Mondays, pot roast on Sundays, just like old times. I vacuumed, folded laundry, kept my voice low when the baby napped. I was careful not to intrude. Melissa was sweet at first. She always said things like, "We're so lucky to have you," and "make yourself at home." I believed her. I tried. I brought fresh flowers for the kitchen every week. I picked up groceries without being asked. When she had a long day, I offered to take care of the baby so she could nap. Brent was busy. Meetings, business trips, but he smiled when he saw me. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," he'd say, patting my shoulder. And sometimes he'd even sit with me on the couch for a few minutes before drifting off into his phone or the television. For a while, I thought maybe I was helping. Maybe I wasn't a burden. Maybe, just maybe, I still mattered in someone's day. But slowly, little things began to shift. My room, well, the guest room, had no lock, not even a latch. I found Melissa in there one morning, organizing my closet, just making space for the baby's winter clothes, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Another time, I noticed my knitting basket had been moved to the garage to keep things tidy. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to warm up a cup of tea. Melissa stopped me, wiping down the marble counter with a bit too much force. I've been trying to keep the main kitchen clean," she said lightly. "Would you mind using the one in the laundry room from now on? It's just easier." I froze. Just for a second. Then I smiled and nodded. Of course. But in that moment, something inside me wavered. I wasn't blind. I'd worked with dying patients. I'd held hands through last breaths. I knew the tone people used when they wanted to seem kind, but really meant, "You're in the way." Still, I told myself I was imagining it. That grief was making me overly sensitive. I didn't want to rock the boat. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to believe I still belonged. So I used the side kitchen. I kept my belongings minimal. I stayed silent. But the silence wasn't empty this time. It was watching. And I was starting to see things that didn't fit. The way Melissa's smiles ended too soon. The way Brent avoided eye contact when I asked about the mail or the mortgage, or why the baby had my old rocking chair but no one mentioned it. Something wasn't right. It was a Saturday morning just after 8. I was in the kitchen, the laundry room one, of course, warming milk for the baby's cereal. The sunlight was soft through the blinds, and I remember thinking the day might actually be peaceful. Melissa walked in, barefoot, holding her mug like a prop. Her robe barely touched her knees, her hair still wet. She didn't smile. "I think it's time you started looking for somewhere else to live," she said. Just like that. No greeting, no warning. I blinked, holding the spoon mid-air. I'm sorry? She set her mug down. "You've been here 6 months. We've done what we could, but this isn't working anymore. You need your own space." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Melissa, you and Brent said this was my home now. You said I should settle in." "That was then," she said, tilting her head. "Now things are different." Before I could respond, Brent walked in, buttoning his shirt, coffee already in hand. He gave Melissa a nod, kissed her cheek, then looked at me as if I were just another piece of furniture. "Morning," he mumbled, then turned to grab his keys. I stepped toward him. "Brent, what's going on? Is this true?" He didn't meet my eyes. "We just need some space, Mom. It's nothing personal. We'll help you look for a place." "Help me?" I repeated. My throat was tightening. "Brent, this is supposed to be my home." He shrugged, almost apologetically. "It's just not sustainable." Melissa added, "We were trying to be nice, Elaine, but the baby needs his own room, and it's just time." Time. As if grief had an expiration date, as if motherhood did. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. Brent left for work without another word. Melissa didn't even stay for the cereal I'd prepared. I returned to my room, no, their guest room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the floor for a long time. Then the tears came, hot and soundless, slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. I wasn't just hurt, I was erased. For hours, I didn't move. I thought about packing, about calling that widow from church who had an extra room, about looking for senior housing in the next town. I even opened my laptop and began searching. Then something stopped me. I opened my online banking, mostly to see how long I could afford a place of my own. My late husband and I had saved diligently. There should have been over $75,000 in my personal account, but the balance stared back at me. 20 out, $917. I frowned, checked again, then clicked into the transaction history. Transfers, withdrawals, most under $5,000, small enough not to trigger alerts. My stomach turned. Melissa had known my passwords. I remembered now, months ago, I'd written them on a sticky note when helping her set up a payment for the plumber. I'd meant to change them. I never did. I called the bank immediately. After 10 minutes of verification and transfers, a calm woman on the line said, "Yes, ma'am. These were authorized from a device connected to your household IP. Some were linked to an external account under Brent Howard." I didn't even feel angry. Not at first. Just hollow. "Can you send me the full transaction list?" I asked. "Of course." As the email came in, line after line of betrayal spelled itself out across the screen. Rent payments, online shopping, a landscaping service, even Melissa's monthly Pilates subscription. They had been using my money, my husband's life savings, to live more comfortably while planning my exit. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been a strategy. Suddenly, their hospitality, their kindness, the invitation, it all felt staged. A trap. I closed the laptop slowly, hands trembling. A strange calm settled over me, one I hadn't felt since Robert's funeral. They thought they were clever, but they'd forgotten who I was. The next morning, I sat at the dining table before sunrise, a notebook open in front of me, the email from the bank still fresh in my mind. My fingers tapped absently against the table. There were gaps, things I hadn't noticed, or had noticed and dismissed. The more I thought, the more those small, strange moments resurfaced like fragments of a larger picture. Months ago, Brent had asked me for the deed to our old house, the one Robert and I shared for 40 years. "The bank needs a copy," he'd said casually over dinner, back when he still looked me in the eye. "For refinancing purposes, in case you ever want to sell." I'd hesitated, but he'd reassured me. "It's just protocol. I'll return it next week." He never did. I never asked again. That was mistake number 1. I headed up to the attic that afternoon. Melissa wasn't home, and Brent was out of town. The attic had always been my safe space. Old records, family photos, insurance documents, things only I ever touched. I opened the metal file cabinet and rifled through the manila folders. tax returns, medical papers. But the folder marked home, deed, and insurance was missing. I paused, then reached for Robert's old safe behind the garment boxes, still locked, still intact. I spun the code slowly, our anniversary, and opened it. Inside were only half the documents I expected. No deed, no mortgage agreement. Just a few outdated insurance copies and Robert's military service papers. That's when I knew. This wasn't carelessness. This was premeditated. I grabbed my phone and called Thomas Levy, our old family lawyer. He'd helped us draft our wills, manage estate planning, and knew our history better than anyone. "Elaine," he greeted warmly. "I've been meaning to call. I was sorry to hear about Robert." "Thomas," I said quietly, "I need your help, and I need you to be discreet." Within a day, we met in his office. I brought everything I could find, fragments, digital records, screenshots. He listened patiently, took notes, and pulled up his own files. "According to this," he said, flipping through a folder, "the ownership of the house you and Robert lived in was never officially transferred to Brent. There's no deed change, no quitclaim deed on file, and no power of attorney submitted legally." I stared at him. "Then whose name is on the title?" He looked up. "Yours." My breath caught. "You mean, legally, I still own that house?" "Yes," he said, "unless someone forged documents after Robert passed, which would be a criminal offense." Suddenly, I wasn't the helpless old woman in the guest room anymore. I was a legal homeowner, being evicted from property I still had claim to. That night, I made tea in my tiny basement kitchen, heart racing, mind spinning. Melissa was on the phone in the living room, laughing, her voice sharper than usual. I wasn't trying to listen, but her volume made it hard to ignore. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing," Melissa said. "She's still stuck in the past. I mean, she practically signed everything over." A pause, a chuckle. "If she croaks tomorrow, Brent gets the house automatically." Another pause. Yeah. She signed a transfer form when Robert died, just didn't read it. Typical." My hands trembled around the teacup. Signed? I hadn't signed anything. Nothing formal, nothing I hadn't read. Unless... My heart dropped. There was a night, 2 weeks after Robert's funeral, when Brent had come into my room. I was sedated, grieving, barely functioning. He sat beside me, held my hand. "Just a few papers for the estate," he said gently. "The lawyer needs them by morning." I'd signed blindly. I hadn't even remembered what I was wearing. I felt sick. Brent, not just Melissa. They both played me. Together. I crept back to my room, closed the door silently, and sat on the edge of the bed. My mind wasn't spinning anymore. It was focused. Cold. They thought they had buried me in grief. But what they didn't realize was I'd spent my entire life dealing with trauma, death, chaos. I didn't crumble. I prepared. And this time, I was going to take everything back. Thomas agreed to help me file a legal inquiry into the house deed. Quietly. No alerts. No flags that would tip Brent or Melissa off. He would act as a neutral third party, an anonymous buyer interested in acquiring the home just in case things got ugly. I returned to Brent's house that afternoon with a grocery bag in hand and a smile fixed tightly on my face. "You're awfully chipper today," Melissa said, eyeing me from behind her laptop. "Fresh air helped," I replied. "Felt good to walk." I offered to make dinner that night. Brent had returned from his trip. He greeted me with a quick nod, then dove into his phone. As I stirred the pot of stew, I looked at them, 2 people who had once been my family, and realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt control. Because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't their house. It was mine. Over the next week, Thomas and I coordinated with the bank. He reached out, posing as a third-party investor interested in the property. The bank, still listing the deed under my name, agreed to negotiate the sale, directly to me. I used a different name for the transaction, a trust we had set up years ago for Brent's college fund. Ironically, that same trust would now be used to reclaim the very home he thought he controlled. I funneled funds from Robert's life insurance and my remaining savings to complete the deal. It was tight. Every dollar mattered. But I didn't flinch. While the paperwork moved forward, I played my part, cooking meals, folding towels, keeping my voice soft, my steps light. I even asked Melissa for apartment brochures she'd left lying around. "Oh, this one's decent," I'd say, circling listings with a pen. "Maybe I'll schedule a visit." She beamed. "That's wonderful, Elaine." The signatures finalized 3 days later. The house was mine, again, fully, legally, and indisputably. That night, I sat in my room, and read through the purchase confirmation. And then, out of curiosity, I called the bank one last time. "I just want to make sure all accounts associated with the property are up to date," I told the representative. "Of course, ma'am," she said. After a moment, "Well, actually, there is one concern." "Go on." "There's an outstanding loan tied to your name," she said, "from a third-party lender, high interest. It's substantial." My blood ran cold. "When was it taken out?" "6 months ago," she replied, "shortly after your husband's passing." I froze. 6 months ago. The same week, Brent had moved me into his house. I requested the details, and within the hour, I had a PDF open on my laptop, loan documents with my full name, social security number, and a forged signature. The borrower? Brent Howard. He had used my identity to take out a loan of $47,000. With interest, the total balance now exceeded $60,000. If I hadn't caught it, if the lender had filed a claim, I would have been liable. My retirement could have vanished, my credit destroyed. I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just a scheme to push me out. This was theft, identity fraud, financial abuse. And yet, as I stared at the loan, I saw something else. Desperation. Why else would my son risk something so reckless? Melissa must have pressured him, or maybe he felt trapped, unable to maintain their lifestyle. It didn't matter. The damage was real. I had every right to report it, but I didn't. Instead, I authorized a silent payoff through Thomas, using the last of Robert's life insurance. Not out of pity, but because power doesn't always come from punishment. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly how much someone owes you and choosing not to crush them with it. I printed the loan statement, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Let them sleep peacefully tonight. Tomorrow, I would remind them who I really was. I spent the entire afternoon preparing dinner, my pot roast recipe, the one Brent used to request on his birthday. I set the table with real china, polished the silverware, folded the napkins with care. Candles flickered. Music played softly from the Bluetooth speaker. The house had never looked warmer. Melissa was the first to arrive, dressed casually in yoga pants and a loose cardigan. She carried a bottle of wine and smiled when she saw the spread. "Wow, this is fancy." Brent came in shortly after, loosening his tie. He looked relaxed, maybe even a little smug. "You didn't have to do all this, Mom." I smiled gently. It felt right. One last dinner before changes begin. Melissa sat across from me, still oblivious. "I hope the new place is nice. Did you sign the lease yet?" "Not yet," I replied, pouring wine into each glass. "But everything's in motion." We ate in near peace. Brent made small talk about his job. Melissa showed off pictures of the baby in a new Halloween costume. I nodded, laughed at the right times. I played the role to perfection. And then, just before dessert, I stood. "There's something I want to share," I said. Brent looked up. Melissa paused mid-sip. I reached into the side drawer of the buffet and pulled out a thick folder. Legal papers neatly bound, copies of bank statements, mortgage confirmations, and the finalized purchase agreement. I laid it gently in front of them. Melissa frowned. "What's this?" I met her eyes, calm, unflinching. "This house," I said, "now legally belongs to me." Again. Silence. Brent blinked. What? I gestured to the documents. I bought it back, quietly, a few weeks ago, under a trust that Robert and I had set up before he passed. The deed is in my name. Melissa reached for the folder, flipping through the pages, her face draining of color. This can't be right. We never agreed to sell. You didn't have to, I replied. The house was never fully transferred to your name. Brent never completed the paperwork. You lived here on borrowed time. Brent stood slowly. Mom, why would you... I cut him off, voice steady. Because 6 months ago, you brought me into this house under the guise of care and kindness. Then you took my money, used my name to take out a loan. You and your wife plotted to remove me. Melissa's chair scraped back. We never... Save it, I said. I don't need your confessions. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Brent sat down hard, burying his face in his hands. You have 30 days, I said softly, to leave. Melissa's voice rose, brittle and sharp. You can't do this. Where will we go? What about the baby? I tilted my head. Those are the same questions I asked, remember? The ones you didn't answer. She started crying. Brent looked at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, he said, it wasn't meant to go this far. We were just trying to get ahead financially. Melissa thought... I know what Melissa thought, I interrupted, and I know what you allowed. They waited for the hammer to fall, but I didn't swing it. Instead, I took a breath and sat back down. I'm not evicting you, I said. Not yet. Melissa froze. Brent blinked. What? I won't kick you out, I said calmly. But from this moment on, I set the rules. You pay rent, fair market value. You contribute to utilities, and you respect the boundaries I define, because this is my house, and I am no longer your guest. Melissa stared at me, stunned. Brent nodded slowly. That's fair. No, I corrected. It's generous. There was no applause, no hugs, just silence and the faint sound of the baby crying in the other room. But for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Because power isn't about control. It's about knowing when to use your voice and when to let silence speak for itself. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I stood in the backyard of the house I now owned. Again. The air felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe it was just me. The rear unit of the house, a small converted guest cottage Robert had once used as a workshop, had sat unused for years. Dusty, outdated, but still solid. I hired a contractor to fix it up. New floors, fresh paint, plumbing checked. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. Private. Quiet. Enough. I moved in by the end of the month, letting Brent and Melissa stay in the main house, but under strict terms. They signed a rental agreement, direct deposits due on the 1st, no exceptions, no special treatment. Melissa didn't speak to me for the first 2 weeks. Brent kept his distance, but I noticed him hesitating longer in the hallway, sometimes pausing at my door, never knocking. I didn't chase their affection. I'd stopped doing that. Still, when my grandson's birthday rolled around, I left a wrapped gift outside their door. A wooden train set, handmade, with a small note that read, "To the boy who deserves to play free." Melissa didn't thank me, but the next day I heard giggles from the living room. The train had found its tracks. They adjusted, slowly. Brent took on more hours at work. Melissa began teaching online yoga classes. They complained less, managed more. Without my savings propping them up, they had to, finally, live like adults. And me? I started living again. I joined a local book club, took walks in the park, reconnected with an old friend, Donna, from the hospital days. We shared lunch on Fridays and laughed like teenagers. I even bought a small laptop, nothing fancy, and began writing. At first, it was just journaling, a way to process what had happened. But over time, the story took shape. Not a rant, not revenge, just truth. Honest, quiet, sharp. I titled the piece, "When Your Children Forget Who Raised Them." I posted it to a support forum for older parents. Then someone shared it on Reddit. It went viral overnight. Comments flooded in. Women, men, strangers across the country. Some offered solidarity. Others told their own stories. The heartbreak was universal. So was the silence they'd lived in. But now they were speaking. And somehow, so was I. A journalist from a local paper reached out. She wanted to do a feature. I declined the interview but gave permission to quote the post. It became part of a series on elder abuse and family power dynamics. The headline read, "She raised a son. He raised her rent." Fitting. I didn't tell Brent about it. I didn't need to. But one day I caught him sitting on the porch, phone in hand, staring at the screen with a strange look in his eyes. He didn't say anything. Neither did I, but something shifted after that. He began greeting me more often, offered to take the trash out, asked about my health. They weren't grand gestures, but they were seeds, and seeds grow, even in fractured soil. I didn't forgive them, not entirely, but I wasn't angry anymore, because now I had something more powerful than reconciliation: boundaries. I no longer needed to be accepted to feel valid. I no longer needed their gratitude to confirm my worth. I had reclaimed something far greater than a deed or a title. I had reclaimed myself. And in doing so, I'd sent a message, not just to Brent and Melissa, but to every person who'd ever been told they were too much, too old, too inconvenient. The message was simple. Do not let anyone define your value, especially not the people you raised. Today, I sit in the sunlit corner of my tiny kitchen, tea in hand, window open. The breeze carries the sound of my grandson's laughter. It's real, bright, unfiltered, the way it should be. I don't know what the future holds for Brent and Melissa, but I know what it holds for me: peace, clarity, and the quiet, steady power of someone who remembered who she was before anyone tried to rewrite her.